Elijah Morgan had spent his entire life looking to the stars, but he never expected the stars to look back, much less send a representative. The first time he saw Varys, she was standing in the observatory doorway, silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway. Her silhouette was unmistakably humanoid, yet subtly wrong, too tall, too willowy, with a head that tapered to a delicate point. "You must be the astronomer," she said, her voice carrying a musical lilt that no human throat could produce. "I am Varys Naktai, xenobiological researcher of the Asterian Collective." Elijah fumbled with the star charts he'd been reviewing. "Yes, I mean that's me, Elijah Morgan, astrophysicist." He extended his hand reflexively, then withdrew it awkwardly, unsure if her species practiced handshakes. Varys tilted her head, large iridescent eyes blinking with visible membranes. After a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward and reached for his retracted hand, her movement graceful but cautious. Her skin was cool to the touch, with a slight texture like fine suede. "The gesture of hand clasping," she said, her long fingers wrapping around his. "I have studied your customs, though experiencing them directly is different." The International Space Agency had announced the arrival of the Asterians 3 months ago, a peaceful, scientific delegation to establish first formal relations between Earth and their civilization. The observatory where Elijah worked had been selected to host one of their researchers, but he hadn't expected to be the primary liaison. "Sorry about the mess," he said, gesturing to the cluttered office. "Star charts and coffee mugs competed for space with half-assembled equipment. They told me you'd be arriving next week." "An error in translation of your Earth calendar," Varys explained. "My apologies for the premature arrival." Under the observatory lights, Elijah could see her clearly now. Her skin had a bluish-violet hue that shifted slightly with her movements. Where a human would have hair, she had something like delicate tendrils that responded to air currents floating weightlessly around her elongated face. The effect was both alien and strangely beautiful. "Would you like some coffee?" he offered, then immediately winced. "Wait, can you even drink coffee? Is it toxic to your system?" I should have asked. A sound like chiming bells emanated from her, laughter he realized with surprise. "I cannot consume your caffeine beverages, but I appreciate the hospitable intention," she said. "Your nervousness is unnecessary. I find human awkwardness endearing." Something in the way she said endearing made Elijah's face warm. Over the next few hours, they settled into a tentative rhythm. Varys explained her mission, to study Earth's astronomical practices and share Asterian knowledge, while Elijah showed her the observatory's equipment. When she examined the ancient refracting telescope, her tendrils rippled with what seemed like amusement. "This instrument is charmingly primitive," she said. "It's mostly ceremonial now," he admitted. "But sometimes the old ways let us see things the new technology misses." Varys considered this, a poetic sentiment. "My people often say that understanding comes not from the sharpest eye but from the widest perspective." "I like that," Elijah said, surprising himself with his genuine enthusiasm. "Maybe our cultures aren't so different after all." As night fell, they stood side by side beneath the observatory dome, watching the stars emerge. "That one," Varys said softly, pointing to a barely visible pinpoint of light. "Third star of what you call Cassiopeia, around it orbits my homeworld." Elijah felt a strange tightening in his chest. Here stood a being from another world, a world that until recently had been nothing more than a theoretical possibility, and she was homesick for a star. "Welcome to Earth," he said finally. "I hope the stars look familiar enough from here." Varys turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "The stars are the same. It is everything else that is wonderfully, terrifyingly new." Neither of them realized then how their worlds were already beginning to collide, like binary stars locked in an inescapable dance, drawing ever closer to one another. 3 weeks after Varys's arrival, Elijah found himself actually looking forward to going to work each day. Their professional collaboration had quickly developed into something more personal, hours spent discussing the differences between their worlds, laughing over cultural misunderstandings, and occasionally brushing hands while sharing telescope controls. Tonight, Elijah had reluctantly agreed to bring Varys to the observatory's monthly social gathering. As they entered the crowded break room, his colleague Marcus whistled low. "So this is the alien who's been keeping you locked up in the observatory," Marcus said, eyeing Varys with undisguised curiosity. "No wonder you've been working late." Varys's tendrils rippled in what Elijah had come to recognize as mild confusion. "Is it unusual for humans to enjoy their professional duties?" "Depends on the company," Marcus replied with a wink. He clapped Elijah on the shoulder. "So have you gotten to first base yet?" Elijah choked on his drink. Marcus, for God's sake. But Varys was already tilting her head inquisitively. First base, I am unfamiliar with this astronomical reference. It's not astronomical, Elijah said quickly. It's just a stupid human expression, ignore him. Later, as they walked back to the observatory under a canopy of stars, Varys said, your colleague's question distressed you. Was it inappropriate? Elijah sighed. It's a reference to dating, physical intimacy levels. In human culture, we sometimes use baseball metaphors for romantic progression. Baseball, Varys repeated carefully. The sport with the small projectile and striking implement, fascinating cultural linkage. The conversation moved on, and Elijah thought nothing more of it. 2 days later, Varys appeared at the observatory carrying a large canvas bag. She had been spending her mornings at the Cultural Integration Center, learning about Earth customs independently. I have prepared for our next interaction phase, she announced, setting the bag on his desk with a solid thump. Our what? In response, Varys reached into the bag and solemnly withdrew a baseball glove. It was followed by a ball, a bat, and finally, to Elijah's complete bewilderment, a white square cushion. First base, she explained, pointing to the cushion. I have researched thoroughly. This is the correct equipment for the human courtship ritual your colleague referenced. Elijah stared, momentarily speechless. Varys waited expectantly, her iridescent eyes blinking once, twice. That's actually a physical base from a baseball field, he finally managed. The expression is metaphorical. Varys's tendrils drooped slightly. I have misunderstood. Elijah couldn't help it, he burst out laughing. After a moment of confusion, Varys's bell-like laughter joined his. Perhaps, she suggested, you could demonstrate the correct interpretation. The laughter caught in Elijah's throat as he realized she was completely serious. Her eyes held a mixture of scientific curiosity and something warmer. First base means kissing, he explained, his voice suddenly hoarse. It's just a silly way humans talk about intimacy. Kissing, Varys repeated, the pressing together of mouth structures. My species has a similar practice, though the neurological response is quite different. She stepped closer, the baseball equipment forgotten between them. Would a demonstration be scientifically valuable? Elijah asked, heart hammering against his ribs. Varys's tendrils swayed forward, almost brushing his face. Extremely valuable, she murmured, for cultural understanding. When their lips met, Elijah felt a subtle electrical current run through the contact point, not unpleasant but unmistakably alien. Varys made a soft sound, somewhere between surprise and pleasure. They broke apart, both a little breathless. Fascinating, Varys whispered. The Asterian equivalent creates a temporary psychic resonance, but your human method produces interesting biochemical reactions. That's one way of putting it, Elijah said with a shaky laugh. Varys gestured to the forgotten baseball equipment. Should we return these items now that I understand the metaphor? Maybe keep them, Elijah suggested. I could teach you the actual game sometime. Later that evening, as they stood side by side cataloging stellar anomalies, Varys suddenly asked, what constitutes second base in your baseball metaphor? Elijah nearly dropped the star chart he was holding. This cultural exchange was getting more complicated by the minute, and he was enjoying every second of it. The sunset painted the sky in hues that reminded Varys of her homeworld's binary star system, purples and oranges bleeding together on the horizon. She and Elijah sat on the observatory's roof, legs dangling over the edge as they shared their evening meal. Your month cycle on Earth is nearly complete, Varys noted, her tendrils swaying gently in the evening breeze. I have learned much about human astronomy and other customs. Elijah smiled, remembering the baseball equipment still stored in his office. In the weeks since their first kiss, they had developed a comfortable rhythm, alternating between professional collaboration and increasingly personal moments. What happens after your research concludes? He asked, voicing the question that had been haunting him. Varys's eyes shifted to a deeper violet, a sign of contemplation he'd learned. In the Asterian collective, bonds formed during research expeditions are considered temporary by necessity, she explained. When researchers develop attachments to subjects from other worlds, these connections are honored but not expected to continue beyond the mission parameters. Elijah felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. So we're just a temporary parameter. That is our tradition, she said softly. Is it different for humans? Very different, Elijah said. When humans form connections, they often hope they'll last, especially romantic ones. Varys was quiet for a long moment. My superiors would find such expectations inefficient. Love isn't supposed to be efficient, Elijah said, surprising himself with the word he'd chosen. It's messy and complicated and sometimes makes no logical sense. Love, Varys repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. In my language, the closest concept translates as soul resonance. It is considered a profound but temporary state, like the brief alignment of celestial bodies. Elijah reached for her hand, interlacing his fingers with her longer, more slender ones. Is that what this is for you, a temporary alignment? I do not know, she admitted. This experience falls outside my scientific training. They sat in silence as darkness fell completely, the first stars appearing above them. Varys pointed to a bright point near the horizon. On my world we have a courtship ritual, she said. When two individuals wish to explore a deeper connection, they exchange personal star charts, maps of the night sky on significant days in their lives. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small crystalline disk. When she pressed its center, it projected a holographic star field above their hands, constellations Elijah didn't recognize, arranged in patterns both alien and beautiful. This was the sky above my birthplace on the night I was born, she explained. By sharing it, I invite you to know me beyond the parameters of our assigned roles. Elijah stared at the projection, understanding the significance of what she was offering, a glimpse into her world, her life before Earth. I don't have anything this advanced to share, he said apologetically. Varys closed her hand over the projector, extinguishing the alien stars. Your human methods would be equally meaningful. Their eyes met in the darkness, and Elijah felt the distance between their worlds simultaneously expand and contract. In human tradition, he said, voice low, sharing a second kiss might be appropriate right about now. Her tendrils brushed against his face as she leaned closer. Would this qualify as your second base? Not quite, he murmured with a smile, but it's a good start. This kiss was deeper than their first, more confident. The electrical current between them seemed stronger, almost harmonizing as their different biologies found common ground in the universal language of touch. When they finally broke apart, Varys's skin was glowing faintly, a bioluminescent response he hadn't witnessed before. That response is unusual for my species, she admitted, seeming almost embarrassed. It typically only occurs during moments of exceptional emotional resonance. Elijah traced the glowing patterns on her arm with his fingertip. It's beautiful. It reveals too much, she said. Among Asterians, such visible displays of emotion are considered indecorous. Then I'm honored, Elijah said, that you'd share something so personal with me. As the night deepened around them, they began the delicate work of bridging worlds, not just as scientist and astronomer, but as two beings seeking connection across an interstellar divide that suddenly seemed both impossibly vast and surprisingly navigable. The emergency klaxons wailed throughout the observatory complex, red warning lights casting strange shadows across the normally calm research spaces. Elijah sprinted down the corridor, heart pounding as he rounded the corner to the xenobiology lab where Varys had been working. Varys, he called out, pushing past panicked researchers evacuating in the opposite direction. The lab door stood ajar, acrid smoke seeping through the opening. Inside, equipment sparked and emergency containment fields flickered unstably. Varys stood at the center of the chaos, her hands moving rapidly over an alien device, part of the equipment she'd brought from her homeworld. The containment field is failing, she said without looking up, her voice unnaturally calm. The stellar sample we were analyzing is becoming unstable. Elijah approached cautiously, noticing how the small captured fragment of stellar material pulsed ominously within its deteriorating energy field. Everyone's evacuating. We need to go. If this containment fails completely, the stellar reaction will destroy half the complex, Varys said. The emergency protocols on my equipment are malfunctioning. Elijah looked at the alien technology, its controls labeled in the flowing script of Varys's language. Tell me how to help. The stabilizing matrix needs recalibration, but the neural interface only responds to Asterian biology. Her tendrils were rigid with concentration, a sign of extreme stress he'd never seen before. Then we improvise, Elijah said, moving to the human equipment nearby. If we can't fix your tech directly, maybe we can build a workaround with ours. What followed was a desperate collaboration across technological divides. Varys calling out Asterian scientific principles, while Elijah translated them into Earth technology, creating a hybrid system that might reinforce the failing containment field. As they worked, the stellar sample grew increasingly volatile, bathing the lab in pulses of dangerous radiation. Varys positioned herself between Elijah and the sample, her body absorbing radiation that would have severely injured him. Your biological shielding won't hold indefinitely, Elijah warned, seeing the strain on her features. Focus on the calibration, she replied tersely. Finally, Elijah connected the last component of their makeshift stabilizer. Now. Varys activated the hybrid system, and for a terrible moment nothing happened. Then the containment field flared brightly before settling into a stable, pulsing glow. The stellar sample calmed, its violent fluctuations subsiding. Emergency teams burst into the lab moments later, securing the area with practiced efficiency. As the crisis ebbed, Elijah noticed Varys leaning heavily against a workstation, her normally vibrant skin dulled to an ashen blue. "Medical team," he shouted, rushing to her side as her knees buckled. Later, in the observatory's medical wing, Elijah sat beside Varys's recovery pod. The Asterian doctor had assured him her condition was stable, the radiation exposure serious but not life-threatening for her species. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his face, the sample. "Contained," he assured her, "the hybrid system worked." "Good," she murmured, "your improvisation was impressive." Elijah took her hand gently. "You could have been killed." "As could you, yet you stayed." Her tendrils moved weakly, brushing against his wrist. "This is not typical researcher behavior." "No," he agreed, "it's typical behavior for someone who cares deeply about you." A faint luminescence flickered beneath her skin, weaker than before but unmistakable. "On my world," she said softly, "to risk oneself for another creates a bond called K-Sharith. It transcends temporary alignments. It is permanent." Elijah felt something expand in his chest. "We have a similar concept, we call it love." "I find that I understand your human concept better now," she admitted. "When the containment was failing, my primary concern was not for the research, nor even for myself." "Mine too." The medical pod hummed softly as it continued its healing work. Outside the window, night had fallen, revealing the stars that had brought them together, the same stars that would soon separate them when Varys's mission ended. "What happens now?" Elijah asked, voicing the question that had taken on new urgency after their brush with death. Varys's gaze was steady, her voice gaining strength. "Now we face a problem more complex than failing containment fields. Now we must find a way to bridge worlds not just temporarily, but permanently." Her hand tightened around his. "I am beginning to think that some alignments are not meant to be temporary after all." The Asterian transport vessel hovered above the observatory grounds, its crystalline structure refracting sunlight into prismatic patterns across the landscape. Personnel busied themselves loading equipment and research materials, preparing for departure. Varys stood at the edge of the landing zone, her official uniform glinting with insignia that marked her elevated status. The successful completion of her mission had earned her commendation from the collective leadership. Elijah approached slowly, hands in his pockets. The past week had been a blur of debriefings and farewell ceremonies, leaving them little time alone together. "So," he said, "today's the day." Varys's tendrils moved in a complex pattern he'd come to recognize as emotional conflict. "The collective has processed my mission report. They were particularly interested in our containment field innovation." "Just doing our job," Elijah said with a forced smile. "They have also reviewed my personal request." Elijah looked up sharply. "What request?" Varys reached into a compartment in her uniform and withdrew a small metallic object, a communication device he recognized from their work together. "In Asterian culture, researchers return home to share their findings," she explained. "But there is a provision for continuing promising research paths through extended missions." Hope flared in Elijah's chest. "You're staying." "No," she said, and his heart sank. "But the collective has approved an unprecedented arrangement, a joint research initiative with rotating personnel." She handed him the communication device. 6 Earth months here, 6 months on my homeworld, alternating." Elijah stared at the device. "You mean?" "I will return in 6 months," she confirmed. "And in the interim, you have been invited to visit my world as Earth's first cultural exchange representative." Elijah's mind reeled at the implications. "They're letting me visit your planet." "The collective was impressed by your innovative approach to the containment crisis," she said. "But more significantly, they were intrigued by our personal research." "Our what?" Varys's skin brightened slightly with what he now recognized as the Asterian equivalent of a blush. "I may have included our cross-species relationship dynamics in my official report, for scientific thoroughness." Elijah couldn't help but laugh. You used our relationship to justify continued contact. Is this inappropriate? She asked, concerned. No, he assured her, it's perfect. It's exactly what I would have done. Around them, the loading activities were concluding. An Asterian official signaled to Varys that departure was imminent. 6 months is a long time, Elijah said. Varys stepped closer. Among my people, those who share Kaeshareth often exchange physical tokens to maintain their connection across distances. She removed a slender bracelet from her wrist, a band of material that seemed to shift between solid and liquid. When she placed it in his palm, it adjusted its size automatically. This contains a quantum resonance tuned to my specific biological signature, she explained. When you wear it, I will sense its presence, no matter the distance between us. Elijah slipped it over his hand, feeling it settle comfortably against his skin. I don't have anything nearly as advanced to give you. Perhaps something from your baseball metaphor, she suggested, her eyes glinting with humor. With sudden inspiration, Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out his grandfather's old pocket watch, a family heirloom he always carried. Time works differently between our worlds, he said, placing it in her hand. But this will remind you that on Earth, someone is counting the minutes until you return. Their fingers intertwined around the watch. Without concern for the Asterian officials observing them, Varys leaned down and pressed her forehead against his, an intimate gesture in her culture that she had explained was even more significant than kissing. I believe humans have a saying, she murmured, about homes and hearts. Home is where the heart is, Elijah supplied. Her tendrils brushed his face gently. Then it seems I will be taking a piece of my home with me and leaving a piece here. The transport vessel emitted a series of musical tones, the final boarding call. In 6 months, she said, reluctantly stepping back. I'll be waiting, he promised, and learning everything I can about Asterian culture before I visit. Perhaps by then you can explain your second base concept more thoroughly, she suggested with a mischievous ripple of her tendrils. Elijah laughed, I'm counting on it. They shared one last kiss, electricity and warmth flowing between them, a current that seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker with each contact. Then Varys joined her colleagues in the transport beam, her form dissolving into particles of light that streamed upward into the waiting vessel. As the ship rose higher, shimmering against the blue Earth sky, Elijah felt the bracelet on his wrist pulse faintly. Not goodbye, but see you soon, a promise written in the universal language they had discovered together. That night, alone in the observatory, Elijah aimed the telescope toward Cassiopeia, toward the star Varys had pointed out months ago. Somewhere around that distant point of light, she was heading home, carrying his watch and his heart across the vastness of space. He touched the alien bracelet on his wrist and smiled. Some distances, no matter how great, were worth crossing.